You were talking about going to nutrition. I'm like, did you look at the earning potential?
Guys,
And
he literally told me, you're gonna go from a career where you're broke to another career where you're gonna be broke. If I would have had a program, it would have been more of a fast track. But instead of that, I got lost in documentation. I would spend time in things that weren't necessary. And that's one of the dangers of self-study.
so people don't realize how Linux is all around them.
Yeah.
And they never heard of it. And there are jobs that are going unfilled. You see the disconnect?
Yeah.
It's crazy.
So how did you stumble on Linux?
Well, actually, it was in college. Well, after college. In college, I knew it existed at least. We talked about it a few times in college because I went to the University of Maryland.
So it was like a vague reference of something that exists.
Exactly, of an operating system that exists, but never about its function, how powerful it is, or anything like that. So before that, I want to make sure people know that I didn't start with going for management information system. I actually went to college to actually learn business because I knew I wanted to build something. I knew I wanted to be in business. But I went to New York to visit a friend, and I think my second semester or third semester, almost second year. And then he said, there is this program. It's a hybrid program that can help you put more relevance to your degree. It's business management tied with information technology. I'm like, whoa, first time I've heard that, interesting. So I went back to the University of Maryland, and then I realized that they have this program. They called it MIS. In every university.
It stands for Management of Information Systems.
And also in every university and college, they call it differently. So I switched over. I said, okay, I'm going to go for management information system because I want to be in business. I want to be in the business of managing IT infrastructure and IT businesses. And then I graduated, and I realized
And the struggle began.
despite learning management information systems, they were offering me $40,000, $50,000 jobs.
So
I'm like,
a business analyst role.
basically only business analyst roles. So I said, I need to add something else. I had no clue what that was.
And that's messed up because it's like you go to college, you learn about management of information system, but then you're competing for the same jobs that an industrial psychologist would go for,
Yep.
that a person that studied to be, I don't know, in HR.
Or someone who studied computer science.
Computer science, yeah.
Yeah, and the starting salary was so low, and me always trying to hack the system, see how I can add some more to my resume. I was talking to a friend. I was talking to Emmanuel. His nickname is Mano. I'm like, Mano, I need to add something to my resume, and he said, well, I know this dude who trains Linux, but it's in his basement on Saturday. I hear after you get that 3 months training, you can make $95,000. I'm like, bro, sign me up. Where does he live?
This is 14 years ago, guys. So there's always been a high income potential for Linux.
And also before that, it was Unix. It wasn't even Linux. It was Solaris. Of course, Solaris evolved into Linux. That's a whole other story for another day. But I went to see this guy, and he's been working in Linux for 10 years himself, to tell you how long this thing has been relevant.
Yeah.
And then I took the training. 3 or 4 months later, I realized I was able to land a job for $95,000. I'm like, man, this is great. This is the holy grail. I was so amazed. But of course, after a few years, I moved into more managerial jobs. I moved away from Linux, and I met you. So now you had your nice little career in social science, and you said you were done with this. You were done with social science. And
I was done with humans. That's how I like to say it.
Yeah. So at this point, you said you want to transition into another career.
Yeah, and you're not mentioning I migrated to the US.
Yeah.
So it was like the perfect opportunity to reinvent myself.
Yeah, so you were talking about nutrition, wanting to go into nutrition. I'm like, did you look at, the earning potential? Because if you want to move away from social science and go into nutrition, unless you are a super famous nutritionist.
Guys,
and
he literally told me, you're going to go from a career where you're broke to another career where you're going to be broken.
So I convinced her to not only transition into IT, but specifically Linux, because I understood that Linux at this point was the holy grail of IT. It's the gateway skill to expand your career. Not only you're gonna get a good job, a fairly high paying job as you get into the industry, but it really opens up your career. So that's when I was insisting not only you get into IT, but specifically Linux.
Yeah, and another thing that we were evaluating at that same point was how I would acquire that new career. I remember from the get-go, we said, okay, we're kind of too old to keep getting into school debt. So we were already critical of the college model. So that took away some options. Like, that's one of the reasons why I didn't want to continue the social science route. And it's also something that determined why I didn't go for computer science or even management of information system, because we already had Jubee's experience.
Yep. Because this college degrees, doesn't matter how fancy they sound, they don't quite get you where you need to be. Okay.
And what they can give you, I already had from my previous career. Like I do believe in like college can give you some universal culture, can teach you how to write. Like you write so much that you'll be able to write anything in the future,
including a serious email.
Yeah, from an email to a technical report to a dissertation paper, right? But I didn't have to go through that again because I already had that.
Yeah. So now you transition. And the other thing I really also want to talk about is that despite the fact that I moved away from Linux, all my cohort and the network, value of networking, guys, all my network was still in the Linux field. They were at that point Linux engineer. Some moved on to cloud at this point, but they were still in the business.
Yeah, and Jubee did a great job at exposing me to them and like just having me talk to them. Like, come, sit with Abraham, hear about what he does on a day-to-day, because that's another problem we have when we choose careers. Like we say, oh yeah, I want to be I don't know, a nurse, but you don't get that taste of what it feels like, what the nurse life looks like until you're rotating at a hospital.
Yeah.
So he tried to get me to sit with people to understand what they could do. If they could even show me around their computer and see what their emails look like, all that kind of stuff, they did that for me, and that was super helpful.
Yeah, and all that is the power of networking.
Yep.
So I called on them. They were so happy to actually help. I told them, guys, we are together, between us, we're going to put together a curriculum to help Paloma.
Yeah.
And that's what we did. That's basically how this thing started,
Yeah. So the instructions were a bit rough.
Well, I never claimed to be a teacher. That's what I always said. You will never find me teaching anything at Yellowtail Tech.
Yeah,
I'm not a teacher.
And then Jubee had studied Linux years before, right? And things in IT evolved pretty quickly. So he was a Solaris guy.
Yes.
And whatever I could find, like, all the jobs weren't looking for Solaris. So there was no
Solaris was already outdated.
a thing of the past. Yeah. So I remember I would go to the Barnes and Noble and literally buy every book that said Linux in the title, Linux or Unix. So I lost so much time that, well, fortunately I had the time at that period of my life, but if I would have had a program, it would have been more of a fast track, right? Like there would be decisions that somebody made for me, but instead of that, I had to consume all the materials. I got lost in documentation. I would spend time in things that weren't necessary. And on top of that, I was a victim of the shiny new object syndrome.
Yeah.
So every time I saw that something referenced another technology heavily, I would be like, oh, apparently I need to go learn this thing too.
Yep.
And that's one of the dangers of self-study.
Exactly.
But fortunately, whenever I told Jubee, like, oh yeah, now I'm going to a Ruby meetup, and Jubee's like, wait, what? But why? Like, you're deviating.
Exactly.
So I had that. It was like some form of a boundary that would keep me
guardrail,
yeah.
Yeah. So to continue, I have to make sure it's clear, despite the fact that you somewhat self-studied, because you had a network, you had support, you had people, help you there, but it was fairly fast for you.
Yeah.
You are a fast learner. That I always say to everyone I meet. You not only learn fast, but I like how you always trying and learning new ways to learn.
Yeah.
So this is your thing.
Yeah. It's something I invested in, and I think I've been able to use it in Yellowtail to help our students. So there's a bunch of theories out there about learning styles.
And not only learning styles, study
methodologies, note-taking methods, all these things. If you figure them out, they're gonna help you learn faster.
And that's what you had, and I advocate always, is those soft skills that are not necessarily the technical Linux skills that you bring in. You bring in the good study habit. You bring in the learning how to learn. You bring in the note-taking techniques that you acquired before. All these things you had.
Yep.
So that's why your transition was, despite the fact that it was about a year, it was fairly fast for someone who was not in a program, because Yellowtail Tech didn't exist. You were basically customer number one, student number one.
Yeah.
You see what I mean? So all these things you brought to the table with you, and I'm sure this is what helped you as well.
Of course. Another thing, I didn't try to break into IT. I didn't have that option. I didn't give it to myself, and he didn't give that to me.
Yeah, I definitely didn't give it to. No.
It was
we either do this,
a coach with a whip.
We don't lollygag in this neck of the woods.
So I remember, the day I was buying my first Linux book that taught me my first commands, I was already booking my Red Hat Certified System Administrator certification 6 months ahead.
I actually have a story. I just remembered something about your transition. I remember I was driving from DC and I stopped at Best Buy. I bought you a computer, a Windows computer. Before that, there was no virtualization. You couldn't put VirtualBox inside of your Windows computer.
Of my Mac.
No. You had a Mac. I bought you a computer so you can install Linux on it.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Because now you don't need that. You can just take your Mac. You can just take your regular Windows computer and add a virtualization tool on top of it and run Linux in it.
Yeah.
Back then, we didn't even have that.
No.
But it was interesting. The transition was great. But now let's talk about after the transition. So after the transition, what started happening is that people noticed that Paloma just came into the country. She's already in a new career. Everybody's asking what happened?
How much are you making?
How much are you making? So, it was quite a bit. And we started helping people. People starting not only noticing, but wanting to do the same. The first person you started with was your brother.
Yes, my brother lived like 100 miles away from us at that point. So we were in Maryland, he was in Virginia. And he would come up to Maryland, or we would go down to Virginia every weekend, and we would share notes.
Yeah, but we have to admit, your brother is very smart. To be able to learn this on secondhand notes and actually make something out of it, this dude is smart.
Yeah.
Probably smarter than you.
Yeah, I think we have good genes.
Because because you had a whole network, you did a lot of research, you went for the books. He literally did this from your notes.
Yeah, it was crazy.
It's crazy, huh?
And by the way, he was in a similar position as me. He was a lawyer in the Dominican Republic, and he migrated to the U.S. as well, like early 30s, and he was like, I'm not gonna go to school again.
Yeah, I want you to do what you did.
Yeah, like this sounds faster than me going to school, sitting for the bar, figuring this out. Like,
yeah, that's a 5-year project.
Yeah,
minimum.
He had.
I know people who have done it.
He already had a kid, and he was like, I need to do what you did. And then he was so lucky. He was able to transition. He worked at a big corporation. So he was doing like customer service work, and he just went to them and said, hey, I am learning Linux. I am going to sit for the certification in 3 months, because he was crazy. He did it super fast.
He was smart, not crazy.
Yeah. And then they allowed him to do some shoulder surfing before he had the credentials. Once he showed up with his certification, they were like, yeah, we'll transition you to the IT department. Of course, he got the lowest pay in the whole department, but he stayed in that job for
6 months or less.
No, I think it was like a year. He stayed there for a year, and then when he left that job, he doubled his income.
Yeah.
And he's golden now.
Yeah, and not only we helped your brother, we helped so many other people, but at that point, we were just helping people out.
Yeah.
We spent 2 years.
It was our direct community.
Exactly. We spent 2 years just helping people out, putting together, a one-sheeter in terms of a roadmap.
Yeah.
And then we were like at one point, but this is a product. We can actually deliver this. Not only it's valuable, not only we understand the impact it can have, we can turn this into a proper offering to the marketplace.
Yep.
And this is how we started Yellowtail Tech. This is at this point we started Yellowtail.
And for context, guys, we are in the DC, Maryland, Virginia region. And there's hundreds of thousands of jobs that go unfilled every year since 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. So it was very easy to place people into jobs.
It's funny how hundreds and thousands of jobs are going unfilled. If you walk out now and you ask 10 people if they know what Linux is, 9 of them don't even know what it is. And they interact with it every day.
Yeah.
Your microwave runs on Linux. Your Fire Stick runs Linux.
Your smart TV.
Your smart TV runs Linux. Your Tesla runs Linux.
Airplane systems.
Not only that, your phone, your Android phone is a Linux operating system in there. Your iPhone, your iPhone is a closed version of a Unix system, so it's related to Linux. So people don't realize how Linux is all around them.
Yeah.
And they never heard of it. And there are jobs that are going unfilled. You see the disconnect?
Yeah.
It's crazy. But at this point, we decided, okay, we're gonna launch this. And I remember we were sitting at our apartment on the bar, and we were deciding what do we call the program. And then I'm like, well, one thing I know is I want to go for value over value. I want the promise of what I'm offering to be the job, because that's what I didn't get in college. I got training. I got generic training. I didn't get the support. I didn't get the outcome. I just got the process. So that's when I decided we need to make sure the promise of what we're offering is part of the name of the program. And then you came up with, how about Linux for Jobs? And then that's how it stuck.
Yeah.
Because within the name,
I didn't remember that.
Yeah. Within the name, the promise isn't there.
Yeah.
Because if not, you end up like being like a college where you are graduating people and you don't care, or you don't have any solid apparatus to help them beyond that.
Yeah,
you know?
and digging deeper into the value discussion, that's one of the reasons why we always decided to stay true to Linux and stay specialized, because people would come to us like, oh, you guys are helping out so many people in Linux. Why don't you guys have a DBA training?
Yeah.
And
or cybersecurity.
Or
yeah, you should add this. You should add that.
Network Plus and this and that. And we were like, no.
This is not the model we're going after.
That's not what we know about. One, we understand that Linux is golden because it is like a low barrier entry into IT. The day-to-day life of a Linux admin, of a developer, of a DBA looks totally different. So we understood that a Linux sysadmin could be a role that could nurture entry-level people.
Yes.
And we didn't feel that was there for other careers. So we had this very clear ourselves because we transitioned, or like you went to college and then had to learn Linux. You entered that field and thrived. I also thrived as an entry-level person. So we weren't going to reinvent the wheel with other things, right?
Yeah. So yeah, it was very important for me because in general, it was actually also a business decision. In general, I like businesses that are specialized, that are simple, that offer very few products. That way you can spend more time iteratively improving the product as opposed to trying to be everything to everyone. So that's also why we focus on that. We focus on the value over volume model as we get into this business. And also till today, you're going to notice that it's only 2 programs we have.
Yeah, and we took plenty of time to add a second program.
Yeah, and the reason why we chose cloud as the next step, it's because AWS specifically is built 100% on Linux.
Yep.
So it was the natural next step anyway. But yeah, so this is the story of how we learn about Linux. This is how we actually end up helping hundreds of people get into Linux. And also this is why you should consider Linux as you transition into IT.